all these different magazines for the Gecko, but what exactly are the key features of each magazine and which one should you use? I try to answer this in this video. Hello friends, hello YouTube, how are you doing? Rainbow here with another Gecko video. It's Gecko Week day number 2, and today we are talking about magazines. Now a while back I put out a video about the different Gecko mag releases, and I had the magazine video prepped as well, but then new magazines came along and then things happened. So there's many different magazines for the Gecko, and I've tested all of them, I've battle tested all of them, and so here is my, let's call it recommendation, and also my review on all of these magazines, and hopefully you can get some feedback and some valuable information from this video about which magazine you want to use in the future. So let's dive right into it. There's two key differences between all of these mags. So number one being how they're made, they're either 3D printed or injection molded, and number two being the spring that they're using, which is either a magazine spring or a drum spring. And I'm going to go in detail about the pros and cons of any sort of this. So let's go from like kind of chronological, start with this and go over here, but those kind of want to go, it doesn't matter. Let's start with this one. This is the original Gecko magazine. This is the original design, and I still think this magazine works fine. Personally though, it's not my choice anymore, and I'm going to explain to you why. This magazine being different than all the others on the table because it is in fact the only one that is still using drum springs. However, I will touch on the difference between those two springs later in the video, so for now just be aware that this is the only one using a drum spring. So this is the original Gecko magazine STL as I said, and if you build these yourself, this is a two-part print that you have to glue together on this line right here, and then this bit screws in the bottom, and that's that. Now the next one on the table is one by my friend Adia. So Adia has different versions of this magazine on Thingiverse, one using the drum spring similar to this one using the magazine spring similar to all of these. Link to the files is going to be in the description. While you're on Thingiverse, there's also different versions of this magazine from Adrian himself, but that will be the two-piece design. This is a one-piece design. Now the ones in the middle, just quickly touching on, these are the Teffer design magazines, and these are available in my shop either as a printed design or as a downloadable file. Now with these comes even more variation. The body is slightly different, and they have different, let's call them magazine ends or bumpers. Let's call them bumpers, right? So these ones, the tactical ones, I quite enjoy and I quite like, which is my standard to use. They have they have another bumper which is kind of a little bit wider, so with the same idea here, but in a little bit wider, so it fits the outline of the grip a little bit better. And then they have a version that is similar to this one, but it's not exactly the same. And reason for this is, in the base of this is the original Gecko base, and in the base here, there's a little bit of wasted space, because these screws have to go and hold on to something in the inside of the magazine. These ones are just clipped on, however, therefore the space down here can be used, and therefore there is different setups that have the capacity of one more dart compared to these magazines. I'm using this one, and I do quite like the look of the tactical magazine in the Gecko. And then off to the side we do have the two worker magazines, and they are actually pretty much identical in terms of performance. This is obviously the 10-round magazine, whereas this is the 18-round magazine. Now these worker magazines are obviously angled Talon magazines, so don't confuse them with straight Talon magazines, because straight Talon magazines are not going to work in the Gecko. So if you're using worker magazines, they have to be angled Talon magazines. They do the same thing. However, of the 10 round, I wanted to point out, you can get these 3D printed bumpers as well that you just clip on. Like this is literally just press fit, and then it goes into these nooks here on that magazine, and then it stays on, so it's relatively safe. It does wobble a little bit. If you want to eliminate that, take a piece of tape around your magazine first, just about here, right, to make this a little bit thicker, and then you eliminate that wobble. But then you can have the worker magazine that kind of looks the same as the original Gecko magazine when it's inserted. Insert it here. so you have kind of a similar look, and you have the benefits from the worker magazine while still maintaining the look. Now, what are the benefits of the worker magazine compared to this? This brings me to the next point, which is the obviously manufacturing injection molded plastic versus 3D printed plastic. So overall, injection molded magazines are stronger, quote unquote, and more durable than 3D printed magazines. Of course, there is different materials that you can 3D print stuff in, but in my opinion, overall, unless you go really expensive on something like, I don't know, PETG carbon fiber or ABS or nylon carbon fiber, or I don't know, the injection molded magazines are always going to win in terms of durability and usability. Well, usability not so much, but durability for sure. That's one big plus for the injection molded magazines. They are just, you know, if you drop this on the floor, it doesn't like it, but it's not necessarily going to break straight away. It really depends on, you know, how you drop it and from how high and so I've seen these things break as well. But 3D print magazines, especially if they fall on the lips up here onto, you know, solid ground, they are most likely going to break. So yeah, if you're having a bunch of them in your rig and you're just running about and, you know, worried about dropping one or two, my recommendation is more towards these ones, just in terms of their durability. Now, the next big difference of these two, as well as those compared to the original Gecko and other 3D printed magazines, is the use of the springs. And as I've said earlier, the original Gecko one's using the drum springs. This one, the Idea magazine, there is a drum spring variant as well as a magazine spring variant. These ones here, there is also a drum spring magazine variant as well as a magazine spring variant. And it's just because of accessibility of these things. Now, if you buy these, they are completely assembled, you know, and they come to you, they ship to you, you don't have to do anything. These ones, obviously, you're printing, or you get assembled from somebody who prints them for you, and then you build them yourself. Now, if you buy the hardware straight up where you buy the magazines, you don't have to worry about this, but if you print them yourself, the availability of these two things is going to be depending on which one you're going to build. And this is why, for the longest time, magazines that use the drum spring were so popular. Very accessible, they're relatively cheap compared to other springs, they're not as expensive. And that led to, you know, designs being built around the use of these springs because they're there to do what they do. Now, the magazine spring per se is something that was a little bit more tricky to come by. So the problem with this, with getting one of these springs was they were not easily available, or at least especially when I started looking when the Gecko first came out, they were actually fairly pricey. So you either have the option of, you know, cutting apart a worker magazine, and then by this you're already destroying a perfectly good magazine just to get this into one of these, or, you know, you're lucky enough to find a place that sells them. As a result, for them not being available, I went the other route and I actually had these made. So this right here is the RMP Magazine spring, and it's specifically made for magazines of this size, not of this size. We had those made specifically for the Gecko magazines as well as the Scarlet magazines, since the Scarlet magazine is using the exact same spring, and that's why they were made for magazines that hold up to like between 8 to 12 darts, depending on the size of the magazine. So you can see it's a little bit longer, but that's nice because that's the kind of the pretension you have. It is roughly the same size as the spring that's in here, but not quite. So these are now available in my shop as well. You can buy them individually, or, you know, if you want a magazine with that spring installed, that is now also an option. Alright, now that we have both of them accessible, why would you use which one? Or, and let's put it the other way, what is the problem with still using these kind of springs in these kind of magazines? Those springs are not, in my opinion, not made for this kind of magazine. They are way stronger. They have replacement springs for 25 and 35 dart drums. So like the big drums. So these roll out quite a lot around the drum, and this entire mass is what they are going to pull. So as a result, in a magazine that's only that size and only has like 8, 9, maybe 10 darts loaded, they have a lot of force pushing the darts up, and that causes several problems. The magazine springs, in comparison to this, are not as strong. They're strong enough to do the job, but they're not as strong, they're not too strong, and the force is a little bit different contributed onto the darts, which is what makes them so much nicer. Now, what kind of problems would you run into with this? Now, you probably already know the whole dart wear and tear of the Gecko, which means, like, as I said, this is my first magazine still, so this spring is already quite worn out. So at the start, this would be a lot tougher to do. And you just have a couple of darts in here. And now the squish that you get from this spring is a lot higher than the squish you would get. Let's just do it. Now you have those lined up and you can already sort of see what I was talking about. It's the squish of the dart. Especially when you look at these two, you can see this quite nicely. The second dart is pushed a lot higher. And that causes a problem because the pusher comes in from the back here to push this dart forward. And it's going to scratch on this and it will leave those little nubs on the back of the dart being pushed up. Now, I'm not saying that this can't happen with these magazines. As you can see here, the pusher still can also touch and sometimes will touch the other dart. It also depends on the darts, but it's a problem that is more dominant with the drum springs than it is with the magazine springs. The other issue that you run into with the magazine springs is because of this force being because of the force being higher that it pushes up, you know, it might cause some feeding issues along the lines. And it also, if you're using the slide return spring mod, it's going to put more pressure on the slide return spring mod because of this, like there being the bit of the second dart in the way when the slide return spring mod is coming forward, resulting in the slide return spring mod not being able to completely close the breach when it returns by itself. There's also a problem that you do not have when you use magazine springs. You have either worker magazines or the printed ones. So this is why I think these springs are outdated or not the best to be used in this kind of magazine. If you have bigger magazines and all that, by all means, please do it. So there's designs with these springs for different things like the Firefly magazines, and I don't know. But for this kind of short dart 10 round or 9 round magazines, I'd highly recommend using these, which is why we had them made. I wouldn't have 6 different magazines on the table if it wasn't a little bit more to the difference in the magazines itself. So this being the OG magazine. Problem with this is the spring it uses, and also that you have to glue it together. A lot of people that did their own Gecko assembly struggled with this to get a clean glue together here that will actually hold. And this also adds one more potential point of failure. You know, if the glue, I do not know, you know, is affected by heat or whatever, or if you end up gluing too much and then having glue on the inside. So that is one thing why these things are not well liked. One-piece prints, on the other hand, are super easy to do. Like, you print the part and then you just insert the magazine spring from the bottom with the follower, and then you close it up. Now, if you'd have a one-piece print using a drum spring, the installation would be a little bit different. If you want to, I can do a quick tutorial video on that, so let me know. But basically what you want to do, you don't have a follower in here, then you would kind of, because there would be 2 holes here where this kind of loops through, so this catches onto the printed part here. And then you use, you know, like a longer stick to push down the spring while holding the magazine until it's here. And then you take the follower, you put the follower seated on the spring, and then you slowly take out the stick while this drum is coming up. And then your follower is in there, your spring is installed, and then you just close up the magazine. So yeah, the one-piece prints are also potentially stronger because they don't have the glue line running down the middle. But as I said earlier, the durability-wise, these ones are probably your best choice. The different magazines also have different effects on how you use the mag releases with them, and that might affect your play style, and therefore it might be worth noting. So with the original Gecko not having no mag release, all of them would just be put in and pull out and done. With the mag releases, however, this is slightly different because you can do sort of mag drops with some, not with all of them, and also some will hold better. So for example, this magazine was made together with this mag release. So if you put these two together, it is almost impossible to pull this out. It's not quite impossible. You can force it, you can pull it out, but this is very solidly in there. However, if I just drop the mag release, it just drops out. It's nice and easy. And this, by the way, works the same way with the Warrior Wasp mag release. So same thing, this is relatively sturdy. I can pull it out if I really want to, but it's not going anywhere on its own. But like this, it just drops out and that's it. The original magazine is not quite the same. That's because of the angle of this corner right here being a little bit higher. So you can actually pull this out. It won't go anywhere on its own. It'll do the gravity drop as it should, but it's not quite as good as those ones. These ones are the exact same thing, which is why I like those so much. Just insert them. They are solid. Like, I could pull this out, but I'm afraid I'm going to be breaking things. However, like this, and it just drops. Now the worker magazines, on the other hand, they also have that upper edge on a slight angle, which means you have no trouble just pulling them out as you go, but they will not gravity drop. So no matter which mag release you have, you can pull them out, but they will not gravity drop, and that is due to the size. The body of the worker magazine is slightly bigger in all directions than these ones are, which means they still work and they sit in there, but they will not gravity drop unless you do some serious sanding to the inside of your gecko, which I wouldn't recommend because then they'll go wobbly. So yeah, just something to keep in mind if you want to do the whole like nice and cool sort of looking flinging about or having a gravity drop. You might want to, well, you not just might want to, you will have to use one of the printed magazines for that kind of thing, or do some sanding to your blaster. Another thing that you should consider is that some of these magazines come with a dry fire protection. Now the standard Gecko magazine has one flaw to it, which I really don't like, and that's the last dart here. It's not being held, so it just falls out like this. And of course, normally inside the blast that is not a problem because it sits there. But if you take out your magazine because you're not sure how many darts you still got left, and you just got one and it drops out, it is annoying. And it happened to me in games so many times where I'm like, do I have one more shot? Just cut out the magazine and it just dropped out. I'm like, no. Reason for this is that the follower just sort of ends level with this, which is good for the looks, but you know, if it would be a little bit taller and push the dart up just a little bit more, the dart will actually be seated in there. This is what all of these magazines do. Not necessarily by default, like those ones, the Taffet Design magazines don't do this by default. It depends on which follower you're going to put in there. The follower with the magazine spring does it by default. The follower with the drum spring, you have options to either include or not include this feature. Now, as you can see, the follower comes out of this magazine a lot further, which means that the last dart is still secure in there. It's not going anywhere. Same with this. By the way, it's roughly similar to worker. Even there, follower comes a little bit further out, like so. However, this follower doesn't have the next feature, which is the dry fire protection. So, meaning, in a standard Gecko with a standard magazine, I prime the blaster and I prime back forward, and now I'm ready to go, but I have no dart loaded. So these things have a dry fire protection. So when this is empty and I load and I want to go back forward, I cannot prime the blaster. I cannot ready the blaster to fire, because on the inside what's happening is the pusher pushes on the follower here, and therefore signaling you that you're out of darts and that you have to swap magazines, which is a really neat feature. Now these ones do the same, not going anywhere. And worker ones do not do this. Because of the angle of the follower here, I can go and prime this, and yep, it'll be ready to shoot. So while the dry fire protection is a really neat feature for this kind of instance, and also promotes some really nice gameplay when you're using the Gecko in more of a LARP setting, because like, oh yeah, okay, you're out, and then you flip the magazine, you put in a new one, you reload, and you go. It also causes problems though. If you have the slide return spring mod installed like I have in this Gecko, it does cause some problems, because the magazine will work the same way. So you put it in and then you prime, and it kind of wants to go back forward, but it's blocked by the follower as it should. But now this doesn't drop anymore, because the pressure of the slide return spring is constantly pushing this forward, which is constantly holding the magazine in place. Now you could put the mag release up and pull it out, and then it'll automatically jump forwards. The other option, which is a lot nicer because it doesn't result in so much wear and tear on the magazine and the follower, is When you're in this position, you kind of push back. Now you hold this up here, and then you can take your magazine out. Now you can let go, and it's going to do the thing. It's just an important thing to know that the dry fire protection together with the slight return mod, I said this in my slight return mod video, is not necessarily the best combination. I mean, yes, you can find a way to work with it, but it does cause this problem, so now you know about it and can make your own decision. And one last thing about the magazines to make a fair comparison is the price and accessibility. So even if you know, okay, you want to do the mag droppy things and you shouldn't be using worker mags, but then again, if your mag drops on the ground and it breaks, you don't like that either, so you want to use worker mags again, it still becomes a question of the price. Now, hands down, worker mags are the cheapest of all of those on the table if you do not own a 3D printer. So, you can get these, depending on where you are, between $5 and $10 a piece, which for what they are is amazing. I would say the worker magazines are superior to all of these, and personally I only use worker angle Talon magazines when I play a game with the Gecko as my blaster, but I can see these ones having their value depending on what you want to do. However, these ones are more expensive. If you do not have your own 3D printer, these things will probably set you back, I don't know, $20, $25 a piece, because the hardware is fairly expensive. You know, you can get those for $3 to $4 depending on where you are. You can get these for like, I don't know, $4 to $6 to $7 depending on where you are, then plus shipping on top. And then you need the printed files, and the stupid thing is they actually take long to print, and so this is why they become more expensive. However, if you have your own 3D printer, it's a different sort of story. If you have your own printer and you have the files and can print out as many as you like for yourself, well then that's fair game. These files are on Thingiverse, these files are on Thingiverse, so you could just go and get those. These files here with the complete variations of all of them are available in my shop, so you can get those as well and print as many as you like for your private and personal use. So I guess in the end, it comes down to what you have accessible. Do you have a printer? Do you not have a printer? What is available where you live, and what you want to do with it. If you just want one magazine for the Gecko to look good, go with one of these, have that set. If you have a printer and want to print your own magazines but want to have multiple, I recommend these because they function just slightly better than those ones. If you have worker magazines at hand, or if you can access them for relatively a good price, definitely get those. I personally use those. So yeah, that is my honest opinion on those magazines. And just FYI, so this is the standard for the Gecko 2.0 in terms of magazines. Now the Gecko 2.0 is the overworked Gecko and is going to be part of tomorrow's video. So if you're interested in all the changes of this version compared to the original Gecko and why I think this one is so much better, come back tomorrow for tomorrow's video where I'm going to present the entire Gecko 2.0 and all the changes that we've made. Alright, that was it for the magazine video, magazine review, magazine overview. I hope this was helpful to you guys. I hope you could take something away. Let me know in the comments below which magazine you think is the best for the Gecko, which look do you like the best, and which one are you most excited about. Gecko 2.0 in tomorrow's video, and I'll see you then. Love and sunshine.